Okay, hello everybody and welcome. I'm Dr. Kelly Young. I'm a professor in biological sciences at Cal State Long Beach, and I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Antonio Martinez. He is a new first semester assistant professor in mathematics education at Cal State Long Beach. And as a humble brag, he's an awesome member already of his department, our college. He's a rock star, introducing things like ungrading at upper division mathematics classes. So really pushing the envelope, really modern thinking about teaching and learning. So he is so valued on our campus already. So with that, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Antonio Martinez, an assistant professor of mathematics education at CSU LB. Dr. Martinez, would you like to share first your story, your journey, and then we'll get into some questions?
Sure, sounds great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I wasn't expecting those kind words. So thank you. Yes, my name is Antonio Martinez. So I guess I'll go back to my undergraduate experience. I grew up in Sacramento. I was born and raised in Sacramento, and I went to Sacramento State thinking that I was going to be a nurse. I wanted to be a registered nurse. My father is a nurse, and so I thought that was a great career path. And first year into the program and sort of like the pre-nursing prerequisites, taking all those classes, realized that I did not want to be a nurse anymore. And so I went to the next major in which I could graduate quickest. And that happened to be mathematics because I had some AP credit from high school. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I ended up absolutely loving it. It's just dumb luck, really. And so fell in love with mathematics, decided to go on and get a master's in mathematics and potentially teach at a community college or go into industry. I wasn't really sure at the time. But during my master's program, at San Diego State University, I ended up becoming a teaching assistant. And so I was teaching calculus classes, integral calculus. And I loved that aspect of teaching and really trying to understand how students learn mathematics. And so that interest sort of opened the door for me to look into PhD programs in mathematics education, in which I decided to stay at San Diego State, in which they have a joint program with UC San Diego. And so I stayed there and just graduated this spring of 22 with my PhD. And so now I'm here. And in terms of some of the work that I'm doing, so my dissertation work was focused on the use of programming as a tool for students to learn mathematics and for teachers to teach mathematics. I did a teaching experiment with 10 students in which we worked on some ideas related to set theory and logic using Python, the Python text-based programming environment as the tool. In some of my graduate work with my graduate advisor, we did a lot of research around active learning, inquiry-based learning, inquiry-based mathematics education, and sort of tangentially related to that, we were looking at how mathematics departments across the United States are sort of adopting these teaching practices and sort of bringing their department into the 21st century a little bit and really trying to support the students in a way that hasn't historically been the case. And so sort of looking at institutional departmental change with respect to active learning practices. And then most recently with the new class that I'm teaching, I'm sort of taking this ungrading approach in which my students are actually having to justify the grade that they think they deserve for the course. And so, so far, so good. I'm collecting data right now, and so hopefully that I'll be able to publish pretty soon on their experiences in this course. So I'm really excited about that. I guess as a sneak peek, the general feedback that I'm getting from the students is that they are really, really enjoying this course in which the focus is no longer on an accumulation of points that sort of is supposed to represent their learning, but instead they have an opportunity to really dive into the material and learn for learning's sake. And so I just saw this question, where are you thinking about publishing your work? I'm not entirely sure yet. So these are sort of the dissemination venues that I have currently published in: Innovative Higher Ed, International Journal of Research in Mathematics Education, and the Journal of Mathematical Education and Science Technology. I'll probably go to a different venue for this work since it probably will appeal to a broader audience. And so I'm not entirely sure yet. It's currently in the collecting data phase, but we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I love, and I just want to sort of highlight your CSU connection as well. And I think that's going to be something that we'll talk about when we talk about the interviews too. But one thing to think about for this particular audience is that, which is pretty cool, is that everybody here has a CSU connection, right? Everybody either graduated from a CSU, master's or undergrad, have been a lecturer at a CSU, or well, everybody here has a mentor at a CSU. So there is some connection there. And so it'll be great to hear how you use that, as you interviewed at CSUs. So let's get into the questions. And I want to first, and I already kind of have hinted at this, but I definitely want to congratulate you on this position and getting this position. It's fantastic. So congratulations. And thank you also for sharing this with us. Interviews are tricky. Job applications are tricky. I would love to kind of step back one little bit to just put everything in context. Can you share a little bit about your job application process, who you applied to, how many institutions you've applied to? Because I know people are saying it's brutal out there and you got to apply to more and more places. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I was finishing my third year of my graduate program when I was collecting data for my dissertation. And at that point, I sort of realized that I was on pace to potentially graduate in 4 years from my PhD program. And so I made the decision in the summer going into my fourth year that I would start applying for jobs as I was writing up the results from my dissertation. It's one of those things where I think I was spending just as much time applying to these jobs as I was working on my dissertation. It almost felt like a full-time job applying to some of these applications. I mean, I guess we'll get into the details a little bit later, but I applied to 14 different jobs. And so 14 different jobs. Most of them were for mathematics education positions in math departments, but I applied also to some general math positions. They were looking for either pure math, applied math, statistics, or math ed. And so those were sort of more competitive because the applicant pool was larger. And then I also applied to some positions in education departments. And so they were looking for more K through 12 experience, but I still thought I should apply just to see what would happen. So 14 jobs. I heard back from 5 of them. I received invites for 5 Zoom interviews, and then one invite for an on-campus interview at Cal State Long Beach.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I think that this is a good message to hear, needing to apply to a larger number of programs. And that's what I've been telling my students as well, as they're finishing grad schools and postdocs in biology. But also, I really want to highlight your message of, I didn't know if I was exactly a fit, but I applied anyway. And I think that's something that's really important, because a lot of people are going to do that. And if we sort of say like, oh, I'm not the perfect fit, we may be missing out on something, and that they could interview. You never know. Obviously, if you're completely not the fit and you're an English PhD, you're not applying for, the mathematics, right? I'm not saying that, but like if it's somewhere within that realm to go ahead and apply. And Shanika, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Young and Dr. Martinez for being here. Hello, happy holidays to everybody. Dr. Martinez, first of all, congratulations on your recent appointment. So happy for you. I'm in a similar situation where I'm towards the end of my PhD program. I'm writing up my results, as over the research that I conducted over this past summer, but also applying for jobs at the same time. And then I'm serving as a lecturer, to make ends meet because I got to eat, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you managed applying for jobs, which we all know can be quite intense? I don't know if you were working or not, so I don't want to make any assumptions. And then working on your PhD, how did you balance all of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was in a fortunate position, not to technically be working as a lecturer or as an instructor. I was being funded through my research work through a research assistantship program. So during my PhD program, or in my PhD program, all of us were funded through research assistantships rather than lecture or teaching assistantships. So there wasn't that aspect of grading and teaching and going to class that I had similar to you, but it is sort of the same situation in which you're trying to balance getting your dissertation done and deciding on which programs to apply to and how to put together these applications, because really, I mean, there are some similar components across the different applications, but you really have to tailor your application for every single job that you apply to. I spent a ton of time reading mission statements, reading the university's calls for X, Y, and Z for things that they want to improve on, and other like fellowship programs and scholarship programs that they're offering to students, and to see if there's any way that I could plug into those things. So even though I applied to 14 positions, I looked at 30 plus other positions that just to make sure that my application was going to a spot that I was competitive for, even though it wasn't maybe the best fit, it was a potential fit for my application. So I wasn't just sending applications all like sort of Kelly was saying, I wasn't sending an application to English departments or anything like that, but I did conduct a broad search, but there was a narrowing process that did have to occur, or else I just wouldn't get the dissertation done.
That's
so
great.
I guess my recommendation would be to keep your search broad, but make sure that you're using that the time you're spending is time well spent, making sure that you think that your application is going to be a good fit.
And as a second,
sorry. I want to also get through some of his questions too. But do you have a quick follow-up, Shanika?
Yeah, really quick. Did you follow up with any of the, universities where you applied, or did you just wait for them to contact you?
I just waited. Yeah.
I think that's kind of protocol. Usually what they do, and correct me if I'm wrong, they will let you know when you have a submitted application. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like you get some sort of feedback, like we have received your application.
That's correct.
Yeah. And then I think that's when you wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I want to get back to, because we have a question in the chat that's actually should be something that we'll be answering. And if we don't, we'll come back to it for sure. But just can we focus on the Zoom or phone? Actually, were they Zoom or phone or both, or what was it?
They were all Zoom.
They're all Zoom now. Okay. Yeah. We've all converted. We want to see.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see people's faces.
Yeah.
That's recent. That's post-COVID. But okay. So how did you prepare for those Zoom interviews? You told us a little bit about preparing. You prepare for your applications by reading mission statements and things like that. Did you do anything specific to prepare for the Zoom part of the interview? Did they give you instructions on what to expect?
Yeah, so I'll focus mostly on the interviews that I had at the CSUs. So I interviewed with three different CSU at three different CSU universities. And so I'll focus mostly on those. The first step that I took was to ask my advisor the questions that they asked, prospective candidates when they were on the job committee. So like, what questions do you ask when you're on a hiring search? And so I started off with a list of 10 to 15, 20 questions. And then I started emailing other advisors, other colleagues that I have, and asked, what types of questions were you asked when you're on the job market? And so I had at the end of me sort of pulling together these questions, I probably had 30 to 50 different types of questions that have been asked or could potentially be asked when you're on these Zoom interviews. And so I sort of just crafted, because you don't want to seem like you're just reading from a piece of paper when you're on Zoom. They want to see your personality and see who you are. And so I did sort of draft some ideas, and they're really just like storylines that I sort of wanted to tell when I was on these Zoom interviews. And so you can sort of fit these storylines into the different types of questions that they're going to ask you. For one of the CSUs, out of the three, they did provide me with questions, and I copied and pasted them here, and I might as well just copy and paste them in the chat so that they're in the record here. I just want to make sure that there's no.
Oh, this is a bonus. This is a huge bonus. Thank you.
Oops, I just realized there's a live link. So 1 second. Let me remove this link.
While you're doing that, can I share something that on a
Yes.
recent job search that I was on for the Zoom interview portion, one of the interviewees was on her bed. And it was not a background. It was just, that was her room in her bed, and it was not awesome. So just put on the fake, I know it's weird, but put on a fake background or be in your office or something. That's my little tip, because I would think this just happened. I would think everybody is kind of Zoom savvy, but there you go. No, yeah. Don't do that.
That's a good.
Oh, you
good
got him.
tip.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So these are three questions that I received from one of the CSUs in preparation for my interview with them. And these are three of maybe 5 or 6 questions that they asked me. And so it wasn't a comprehensive list of every question that they were going to ask me, but these were just some of them that they did ask me. Now, I'm also going to copy and paste another set of questions that I was asked from a private university. But I think these questions are pretty similar to other questions that you might get. And so those might be helpful for you as well as you're sort of preparing for these Zoom interviews.
These are fantastic. And were there any differences between the Zoom interview for the private institution and the CSUs?
Yeah, that's a great question. There actually was a big difference. So I only interviewed at one private, so the sample size is small in terms of generalizing. But at the private university, they did ask me 3 scenario questions. They gave me 3 scenarios that they asked me to respond to. And that was much different than the CSUs. The CSUs, it was a very standard list of questions that you sort of, it almost felt like they were required to go through these questions. And Kelly, you're nodding your head, so I think that it probably is the case. I haven't served on a hiring committee yet, so I don't know how it works, but it very much felt like these are the same questions we have to ask every applicant, basically across the CSU or something like that. I'm not sure. But at the private institution, they asked me 3 scenario questions. One was a scenario like, working with a colleague, one was a scenario working with a student, and one was just a teaching scenario that they asked me to respond to. And it was like a 40-minute Zoom interview. It was long. Mhm.
So, sorry, just to clarify, the scenarios were, hey, you're having an issue, a student comes in and has late work because of whatever, what do you do? That kind of thing that you had to.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
So that's good to be prepared for, or at least that you're not going to know the scenario, but maybe thinking
Right.
about how would I deal with challenges in the classroom? How would I do, and drawing from your experience, right? Because you guys have a lot of experience.
Yep.
But how would I deal with a challenge and like with a colleague?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. One was, and there's a big push right now as for good reason, and in terms of faculty having some ability to respond to issues related to equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so being able to draw on some lived experience, or being able to discuss issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion is super, super important on the job market. And so one of those scenarios was related to an equity issue.
That's fantastic. And last month, we actually had a faculty member who's not only been on a lot of job searches at SDSU, but she's in charge of making sure the interviews are equitable, and that's one of the things that she really highlighted was, we want your experience. We don't want you to just sort of list, oh yes, I believe in this, but like, no, tell us what you have done and share your experience. So that's great. Anything else about the Zoom, anything that was random that you didn't expect, or like the time, I guess, it took between the Zoom and hearing back?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So first of all, the Zoom interviews, most of my Zoom interviews, I had 5 of them. They were around 15 to 20 minutes. But the other private institution that I interviewed at was about a 35 to 40-minute Zoom interview. But the CSUs, they lasted about 20 minutes. Let's see.
That made me feel specific too, because I know that ours are an hour.
Are they really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, closing by an hour, like scheduled for like 50 minutes, but yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well,
be prepared.
Yeah, be prepared. I guess to that point then, if your interviews are an hour long, I had a huge sort of adrenaline dump after each interview that I had. I felt just completely exhausted after every Zoom interview, even though it was only for 15 minutes. I was just exhausted. And one day I had back-to-back interviews, and that was just horrible. But really, it takes a lot out of you. Like, there's a lot of excitement and nervousness, and talking about yourself is sort of, I'm not sure, for me it's a little difficult, but you sort of have to get used to promoting yourself, and so it's just exhausting. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there as well.
So I think something to sort of take home from that is, be thoughtful. If you get an option to schedule here or there, don't do it. I'm just going to do it right after I defend or whatever.
Yeah, right.
I'll do it right after
Exactly.
I teach, and sometimes you don't have a choice, but if you can sort of be thoughtful about the placement and not maybe put them back to back. Okay. I like that. Go ahead.
And to your last question, it took 10 days for me to hear back from the Zoom interview to the invite for the second round on campus.
Okay.
There's a 10-day gap between Zoom interview and the invite.
And then did everybody get back to you after the Zoom, regardless of an invite for the campus or not?
Well, what was interesting is that, so CSU Long Beach, their application window ended October 15th, which was a month before the other applications were even open. So I was getting Zoom interviews after I had already visited with CSU Long Beach. So so I ended up doing the interview at CSU Long Beach, getting a job offer before I even heard back about second interviews at the other places.
Wow.
So everything moved really quickly.
Yeah. And honestly, that's been our push on our campus because we were missing people because we were late. So that's great. I'm glad we got you. That's really good. Okay, so some questions have come up, and I think what I want to do is move into the on-campus interview and that experience. But really quickly, did you send follow-up thank you emails after the Zoom, and you might as well address after the on-campus too?
I did for both. Yeah, so all 5 Zoom interviews, I sent follow-up thank you emails, and just sort of letting them know I had a great time chatting with them. And then after the on-campus interview, I sent a follow-up email as well, and I got pretty much immediate response back from them. And I think, I mean, the hiring committee, they know sort of what this process is like, and they know that you're putting in a lot of effort, so they also appreciate you for your time.
Yeah, and I'm going to second that. What you did, sending those thank yous. People may say, like, do you really need to do that? And I would say, no, you don't have to, but it's a nice step. And especially if you address people by name. So one, you could copy and paste the same email, but put their name in. And if you could put any little, hey, it was great chatting with, one sentence different. It was great chatting with you about X. That's always, I get those emails. I'm like, what? Yeah, that's nice. That person remembered. And, it goes a long way. So I second that. Okay. We have another, Julio. I think we're going to get to your question about any questions you did not expect, but I think we'll do it with the on campus. But first, can we just get into how did you prepare, Dr. Martinez, for the on campus interview? And then we'll talk about the questions.
Yeah. So there were a couple of things. So CSU Long Beach sent me an itinerary of the day that I was going. So I knew exactly what to expect on the day that I was there, sort of who I was meeting with, where I was meeting them, what times, obviously, and so the whole day, even leading up to it. So like, where to check into the hotel, they put me up in the hotel, they provided me with numbers for 2 people on the hiring committee, just in case I needed anything. And it was a full itinerary. They also gave me instructions for the 2 talks that I was asked to give. I was giving one a job talk, the classic job talk, talking about your research, what you've done, and sort of your plan for the future down the road. And then I also gave a talk, which was a teaching demonstration. And this teaching demonstration was actually over Zoom. We did it the next day off, like remote. And so I was back home the day after that I was there on campus, and we did a teaching demonstration. And so that was interesting. That's something that I didn't really expect. But it went well. It was interesting.
That's great. And I'm glad they gave you itinerary. They're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, I feel like that would be an appropriate thing to say. Is there a schedule available for the day, or is anything I can prepare for? Because I know, like for us, again, very narrow, I can only talk about biology at Long Beach, but we do our job talk and teaching demonstration together. Because we invite a lot of students. So we have an auditorium of students. So we ask the candidates to prepare their first part, the intro, like, hey, this is what my research is about, as a teaching demo almost. And then it moves into the higher level research stuff. And here's a little KY tip. Follow those directions, because we get people every time who do one or the other, and the people who've done well have followed those directions to do both. So, okay, that's great. So that's a little weird, but that's okay.
Yeah.
With it, like you do it the day later, demo.
It was during finals week. And so there weren't really any students on campus to do like a teaching demonstration. And so we did a Zoom thing with some students that were available, and other faculty joined and pretended to be students, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
That's okay. How did you prep for that? That's the question. in the
Yeah.
chat. So no, it wasn't interactive with students, but did they give you a topic to prepare on to teach? Or was it up
Yes.
to you?
So the topic was it was related. It had to focus on the standards for mathematical practice, like the K through 12 standards in mathematics education, and so so it was related to that. The audience had to be general enough so that students could also participate, and so I actually did make it fairly interactive. I put people into groups on Zoom and had them come back together, and we shared things like that. And so in terms of preparation, yeah, so I did practice runs with some of the people in my cohort in my graduate program, and then also I asked a faculty member in my program to sort of work with me on my teaching demonstration to help me out, and so a couple of different ways to sort of help me organize my slides and sort of things that I want to focus on, things like that. So I definitely reached out to lots of different people as I was going through this hiring process. I was certainly not alone in preparing for this.
That's fantastic. And then just to kind of weave in what we talked about and what is it going on in the chat, but so you got a list of who you were meeting with. Who was that? Did you meet with deans, chairs, just faculty? Did you meet with students? What did that look like?
Yes, so so first I met with was an associate dean for research, and then I met with the department chair. I met with the dean on campus. I also met with some other faculty, just a couple other faculty in more of a conversation. We went out to lunch, in which 2 students joined us for lunch, and then came back and had my teaching demonstration and then a final interview with the entire hiring committee. So it was about 4 or 5 different meetings throughout the day.
That's great. And I will note that a lot of places will often send you alone with students for lunch because they want to see, because the students get to feedback, they get there, and their opinion matters. Like if you're kind of a jerk to that, not you, anyone on the Zoom, but if somebody was kind of arrogant or, I'm just talking to students now, man, that gets reported and it's not good. So that's why they do that, is they kind of send you off alone with the students. But yeah, having the deans, and then looking them up as well. So you know, and I think, you had talked about too, about wanting, something that you would wish you had done when we were talking before was asking about who was all on the hiring committee. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that was something you, like I thought, oh, is there anything you wish you had done differently, even though it worked?
Yeah,
well, you did work, but was there something that you kind of wanted to have done?
Yeah, so when I was there on campus, I thought my hiring committee was smaller because I had only interacted with 2 or 3 people on the hiring committee up until that point. And so I thought my hiring committee was like 2 or 3 people. I didn't really know how it worked. I kind of figured it was probably larger than that, but the hiring committee ended up being like 6 people. And so I really wish I had a list of everybody that was going to be on the hiring committee so that I could sort of make sure I knew their names and make sure I knew who they were, knew what their background was, things like that. And so if there was one change that I could make, it would just to make sure that I knew exactly who was on the hiring committee before going to campus. One other thing I forgot to mention is that, and something that I'm really glad I did, was I actually watched videos of like YouTube videos of campus tours of CSU Long Beach, so that when I got to the university, everything didn't feel new to me. So like I stepped onto campus and I knew I was oriented. I knew where I was. I knew where the math building was. I knew where the dean's office was. I knew I just felt more comfortable. It wasn't sort of an additional layer of like cognitive overload in terms of where am I, what's going on. And so I don't know, maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just sort of like a weird thing that I did, but I was really glad that I did that because I just felt more comfortable when I was there.
That's such, I've never heard that advice. That's great advice because you're right. It is so overwhelming. You're so like you said, the adrenaline, the stress, everything. And then you're this like, I'm so turned around every time, you know, you leave one interview and go to another one. We have some questions in the chat. Yeah, there's a lot of buildings all over the place. I'm trying to weave the questions in the chat in a way that kind of makes sense of what we had talked about before too. But can we go back to, well, I guess first let's do that. Talking, when you're talking to any interviewers, we have a couple of questions here. The first one is, when you were talking with the deans and the chairs, was that an interview feel, or did that feel like a conversation? Do you feel like they had an agenda they were getting through? Because as we mentioned, committee members on the Zoom and the in-person have required questions we have to ask, and you can't deviate from those. So what about when you're talking to the chairs and the deans?
So the dean, it was very much, I have a set of questions that I have to ask you. And so it was very much an interview style with the dean of the university. Once we got through the questions, we sort of had about five minutes or so at the end just to sort of chat and talk about other things, talk about my research, talk about a few other things that the dean had a couple extra questions about. It was probably more like 10 minutes that we sort of, after we got through the list of questions, sort of talked about some other things. It was still very much a formal interview experience with the dean. With the chair of the department, it was really interesting because the chair sort of started the conversation off by saying, I have no power in the decision of whether or not you're hired. So I want this to be a very informal conversation, which, you know, you can ask me whatever you want. And of course, I won't go out and talk to the hiring committee about what you and I discussed here today. And so it was great. I was able to ask about, you know, the hiring process, tenure and promotion, and other things, the culture of the department, things like that. And so that was a good experience.
That's great. And I really appreciate that, and you have a great chair, but that your chair was able to do that, to say, hey, I am not part of this process, so we can have this discussion that's a little more free. And one of the questions in the chat coming from Tessa, if you want to look at that, is to say that there's a concern that there's implicit expectations that the interviewer will want the candidate to talk about or do something that I wasn't explicitly asked, but you're supposed to know and do. Did you feel that, and let's go back to any of the interviews, the Zoom and the on campus, did you feel like there were hidden curriculum expectations that you met up with during the interview?
That's a really good question. And I think that can be answered with yes and no. So the reason why I say this is that they might ask you a question that might not have a right answer. So for example, in mathematics, they might ask, students are complaining about calculus being the first course that they have to take before they move on to higher division mathematics courses. Do you agree that calculus should be the first course that is taught here at this university? So you can answer that question with it in the affirmative or not. And you can say, yes, I do agree that calculus should be the first course taught because it has so many applications and you can use it in other courses and whatever. Or you can say, well, I actually think that differential equations or linear algebra or some other course should be taught for X, Y, and Z reasons. So I guess the hidden curriculum here, I'm not entirely sure if I'm addressing your question entirely, but the hidden curriculum is that there may not be a right answer always in terms of what they're looking for. I think, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps what they're really looking for is your ability to navigate these questions and discuss and respond logically to some of the questions that they're asking you.
Absolutely. I think that's the main point of it, is how, and so much of it by the time you get the on-campus interview is, do you feel like you'd be a good colleague, honestly, a 30-year colleague? But I think the hidden curriculum there could be that, did you know, or would anybody know that, oh my gosh, there's this huge raging argument about I know about it only because I've been talking to people, but there is, that's almost like insider information that there's a debate going on about this. And so maybe that would be kind of that hidden side is if you didn't, so maybe touching up on some issues that are in higher ed, in your discipline. I don't know, but I think your point is well taken. If you totally have never heard of this before, that's okay. They just want to see you navigate it and be open. So, and that kind of comes to the question that this is my question. I'm jumping ahead of the chat because I really want to ask this question, because I get asked this all the time, and then we'll come back to the negotiation question and the prepping, pre-prep your talk question. But people always ask me, when there's that end of the interview, do you have any questions for us? What questions should you ask? Because there are some questions you shouldn't ask, and that's hidden curriculum, I think. So any questions that you want to suggest that you should ask?
Well, I think if it hasn't already been addressed with your hiring committee or anybody else that you've talked to, asking about sort of the the tenure and promotion process, asking about what that looks like. And it sort of, this may be on the line of what you should and shouldn't ask, but in terms of, are they hiring with the expectation of keeping you and basically expecting to promote you to associate professor, or is their hiring process and their process of tenure and promotion really sort of like a weed out process in which the university might pride themselves on having a 20% promotion rate or something like that. So, I mean, from what I've heard from other colleagues, there are universities out there like that in which they pride themselves on not promoting their faculty that they hire. So sort of getting a feel for what that university is like might be a good question that you could ask. I have a couple other notes here. Asking about the support that they can offer for new faculty in terms of getting your research started, in terms of, is the teaching load reduced at all? Are there resources on campus that will help you writing budgets or things like that? Asking about what is available out there that can help support you as you begin your research career. And then also just like, I guess, easier questions, asking about what the city is like, living in the city, and, sort of what's out there, so just sort of asking about the community is also another question, like an easy question that you can sort of talk about.
Yeah, I think those are great. And they're good and they're not. And what I mean by the hidden curriculum is, or it's not even curriculum, but not asking things like, so when it's a holiday, I don't come in, right? It's things that don't put you in the best light. Well, no, and you can also find that out later. And it's funny because that could be a very normal question to ask, but at the same time, I do think that can have a biasing effect on people, so it's frustrating, but also true. And those are good things to ask your mentors too. Hey, any questions I should avoid? Because a lot of times they're going to be field specific. So I want to open it up to all the questions. I want to also get back. There's two questions that I think too. If I have missed them, let me know. But for the teaching demonstration and or the job talk, did you do a prep at your campus first or with mentors or anything?
I did for both. I did multiple practice job talks. I did one with my cohort as just like a first draft. I did a sort of final draft with everybody in my program that wanted to come. So students, faculty, and other people. And then, of course, at home multiple times. But the two big ones were the one with my cohort to sort of iron some things out, and then like a real run through with my program. I advertised it. I made a poster. Yeah, so it was a real thing. We had everybody there pretty much, and so it served as a job talk, like as if it was a real one for our program, basically.
That's a fantastic idea. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great to actually make it like I've had people come by, but not like, yeah, not doing it like formally like that. That's a lovely idea. Question about negotiating. And I know at CSU, there's not a lot of negotiation that can happen. We're pretty we have our very strict salary categories. So any tips on negotiating? Did you negotiate?
Yeah, so like you said, very little, if no wiggle room in terms of negotiating salary, but I was able to negotiate a better startup package. So they offered me X amount with like no justification needed, like we can provide you this as your startup package, or if you up to a certain dollar amount, if you can justify this dollar amount, then we can potentially support you up to that dollar amount. And so of course, I created a justification up to the max dollar amount. I think I went over a little bit, asking for the max I could, and with the justification for things like travel to conferences, both domestic and international, asking for open access publishing funds, technology resources, and so we ended up coming down to a sort of fair middle ground. Which was lower than the max amount, but they also were able to use funds that they had elsewhere to buy some technology items for me when I came in. So, so startup, I think, is the main area that you can negotiate.
I agree. I think salary is really a tight, not, I've heard of people getting $1,000 more a year. So it's it's not a CSU thing. At other institutions, though, it is. So definitely, consider that. One thing to note for those of you who are in equipment-based, reagent-based, like lab kind of situations, I have had faculty recently, new faculty, who had some challenges because we have to stick to your list. And people are like, oh, but it's changed because I'm not doing that anymore. And so that's kind of something to be very put time into that and request startup lists from people from your mentors. And it's going to be different. But so anybody who has had a recent job would be the best. But from your mentors requesting, what did you ask for? What did you get? I think that's really good advice as well. So I'm seeing, I think I got all the questions in the chat. Anybody have if I've missed it, I'm so sorry. Raise your hand or put it in the chat again. Any other questions that anybody has for Dr. Martinez? Go ahead and unmute. Well, we've been answering a lot as we go too. And I have some links to post in the chat as well. So I guess one thing that, I was thinking about that, about the on-campus interview is you had said you were, oh, sorry, go ahead. Do you have a question? Yes.
Oh, yes. I didn't know if I didn't.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. I just had a question. I did an interview with the CSU last year, and one of the questions was an area where you're lacking, or you could something along those lines. And I think my response wasn't the best. So any suggestions about that?
Yeah, that's
Or an
always,
area to further develop or something like that.
right. That's always a tough question, right? I think the way I responded to that question was that now this isn't exactly how I phrased it, but I think I responded in terms of I have so many interests, so many different interests. And so part of my problem is saying no to things and learning how to say no to new opportunities. And so it's always good to sort of accept new opportunities that are coming to you, but at a certain point you do need to spend time and concerted effort on the things that you're doing to finish them. And I think I said something along those lines of in terms of wanting to really focus in on the things that I'm currently doing and spend the time there, and something like that. I can't really remember what I said, but it was something along those lines.
Yeah, and I definitely would say you want to have, and I talk to students about this all the time, because we have to come up with a weakness that is not really a weakness, that's kind of a fake weakness, but is also true. Because you don't want to, like, what is your weakness? Well, I'm actually super unorganized and lazy. Like, you don't want to say that. You can, like, not that you are, but you have to be really thoughtful about those weaknesses. And I think that weakness is, I'm interested in so many things, or I have trouble saying no because I'm so excited about, all of this. Sometimes I'm just so organized that it gets a little frustrating, because I'm kind of like get stuck in because I have to have things really organized, and I'm really learning to be more flexible is another good one, because it's like a weakness, but not. So those are frustrating, I think. Especially when they say, what are your top 3 weaknesses? And prepare for your strengths too. I had that question, what are your top 3 strengths? And I, was like, oh, I'm kind of going, and I busted out with, I'm really creative, like, which is terrible because I wasn't being creative at the time. But yeah, I would look at the VIA Strength Finder online, VIA Strength Finder. Find great strengths that really pertain to you. Have your 3, they may not ask it, they shouldn't be, but yeah, people do. 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses, or a weakness. And then do we have other questions? Because you have some top tips to share too, which we can get back on the screen. We have 1 minute.
1 minute. Yeah. So if there are no other questions that I can address right now, I wrote down a few tips just to keep in mind. So the first is when you're interviewing, the hardest thing that you need to become comfortable with is talking about yourself and being able to promote yourself. Oh, you have them on slides.
I
Great.
have them.
That's awesome. So being able to promote yourself, it's really important to get comfortable talking about yourself and sort of conveying to them and wanting them to understand that you are a rock star and you have a lot to give to their program. The second one is highlighting all the great work you're doing with undergraduate students. This is a huge one in terms of, especially at a CSU where we are working, part of our tenure and promotion process is publishing with students. And so they want to see that you have experience working with students and that you're capable of mentoring students, and that if you don't have any experience, maybe that you're looking to gain experience in professional development and working with students. And so really highlighting that aspect is going to be big on the job market. And then third, another huge one is being able to discuss your teaching philosophy. So, what is learning to you? What do you think the role of a teacher is in a learning environment? And what are some of these other aspects like assessment and like summative versus oh my gosh.
Formative.
Formative, thank you. So summative, so exactly. You want to be able to know the names between those two when you're on the job market. But so basically, these are my top 3 tips.
This is fantastic. I love this. I think there have been so many golden nuggets here today that it's phenomenal. I really appreciate you taking the time, Dr. Martinez. I know first semester especially, it's so hard. There's so much going on. So you taking the time now, I really do appreciate it. I want to highlight for everybody else that we have more. We're actually in spring going to be talking about writing that teaching statement, that teaching philosophy, the research statement. We do have a January one that comes during the break, so it's recorded, and your Canvas page is coming up next week. So I have all the recordings there, but we have financial tips for CDIT fellows that's going to be on that Canvas page, in addition to then going further into prepping your job application in the spring. So we hope that you can join us for those, or at least join us on the recordings. And again, I'm going to hang out for a little bit, but Dr. Martinez, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time. Thank you all.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.